They've ordered themselves as they are going to speak, and our first speaker is Admiral Allen. So thank you, sir.
Thanks. We have a mythical place in the Coast Guard where we put things we don't know what to do with or too complex to deal with that we call the too hard to locker. I've endeavored throughout my entire career to blast that sucker open, pull those things out, and dismember them. Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, used to do something he called a workout. He would get a bunch of people in a room about the size of the group we have here. He'd have them start shouting out problems, and he would classify them either as rattlesnakes or boa constrictors. You shoot rattlesnakes, fix the problem, and you chop up boa constrictors into pieces you can eat. So I would suggest we've talked about a lot of complex problems, and a lot of things appear to be in the too hard to locker. If you accept that de facto as the reason you can't do anything about it, you won't do anything about it. I think the greatest challenge confronting government today, whether they're programs in government or crises, and these include actually not problems in government, problems in society, is the fact that we haven't been able to confront complexity and try and understand and do anything about it. We're dealing with systems of systems. Complex systems fail in complex ways, as we've heard. So I'd like to see us start shooting a little bit ahead of the target. Walking in and start to fat fingering ICS forms 20 years after the Exxon Valdez, when we had an automated everything after the era of the PC for Deepwater Horizon, was not thinking ahead, shooting ahead of the target. So let me just give you a couple of, a lot of stuff's been talked about. Let me just hit a couple of things that I think we need to be thinking about. Technology. We've got to be thinking about the cloud right now. Cloud readiness, the ability to use that not only for keeping track of data and tracking what needs to be done, but in terms of real-time analytics and our ability to introduce data and bring science into responses. We need to think about mobility. Been vast changes in spectrum, high-performance computation that puts end users in touch with information and technology they've never had before. Spectrum. The use of spectrum and how we use spectrum moving forward and how it's allocated is going to make a great deal of difference in our response activities. And how many people in the room have ever heard of FirstNet? 3 over here. One of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission was to establish a national data network for exchange of information between emergency responders, fire, police, and EMS, so we wouldn't have firemen running into a building and policemen running out of it and lost the lives we did on 9/11. That has been mandated. It's going to be funded by the old UHF spectrum channels as they're auctioned off. It's being built right now. I would suggest to you that anybody who wants to be shooting ahead of the target needs to understand how we're going to be interoperable with local first responders when FirstNet is deployed. So that's technology. Governance. The threats we face in this world today do not respect borders, political divisions, or anything else. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was 45 miles offshore. State waters end at 3. We're going to have jurisdictional issues, but the fact of the matter is the threats we face today, whether it's oil, germs, financial transactions, space weather, or whatever, cyber security issues, are borderless and have to be managed within a global commons. We found that out with the Loop Current, where we had to actually go and engage Cuba on what would happen if we actually had oil in their waters, and to engage in OSRO meant we were violating foreign export laws. Again, shoot ahead of the target. Where are we going here? It's been on the table too long. I beat it like a dead horse. I'll say it one more time and probably put it on my coffin. We got to ratify the Law of Sea Treaty if we're going to be serious in the Arctic. Whatever. We need to do whatever we can administratively regarding governance that's within the power of the NRT to make administrative changes or rule changes, whether it's EPA or Coast Guard, to implement what we think we need to do absent legislation. And John, you know I respect you to death. You know, but right now my definition of Congress is that body that engages in random acts of aftersight. You can take that to the chairman and tell him it's from me. I mean, we got to get serious about this, and I know it's not your issue moving forward. We got to get serious on governance, not only at the local level and how we manage these things. The RRT was made irrelevant by politics during the spill. They've got to get put back into the process. And we've got the local politicians involved in area contingency plans right now. That's the good news. And Pete did a great job down there to do that. The bad news is the model of the federal government working with the state is breaking down. And it's impossible to manage direct federal relationships with municipalities across the entire United States if we start talking about what FEMA does in disaster response. So I think there's a whole issue of federal governance and where it is we really want to be going and how we do these really hard, complex problems in response to the needs of the nation. And finally, operations. I want to make a correction because I've had at least 4 people come up and talk to me about ICS. I didn't say scrap it. I said it was challenged. We need to make it scalable, both up and down and horizontally. And as somebody, and I had this conversation with FEMA as well, our ability to bring in NGOs, volunteers, and so forth needs to be addressed. I wouldn't suggest we get into the Vessel of Opportunity program again without a lot of forethought. Because that was, again, to an extent, that was BP throwing money at the problem, as Pete said. But if we neglect these people that are standing out there with passion, resources, and commitment, and the minute we tell them no, they're going to Channel 4. Then you've got another problem to deal with. So I think in terms of operations, if we're going to take a look at the ICS system and how it scales, then we need to figure out how we bring in stakeholders and other players in there to make them consequential. That said, we're going to have the same issues they have when there's a Stafford Act response, and that's whether or not they're acting as a government agent. Are there liability issues? Security, access, accreditation, safety training, and so forth. That can become a mandate for organizations that want to play seriously, to do that upfront homework so they can be mobilized in a timely manner. Then they can be brought in. If they can't, the best they're going to do is hand out water bottles. And no matter how much passion, resource, and commitment they've got, we won't be able to bring them into the response. Thanks.
Thank you, Admiral. Fran Ulmer.
Don't disagree with the thing you said, particularly the part about the law of the sea treaty, which is so long overdue. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know you have all listened to a lot of really good ideas and impassioned comments from people. It's hard to tie that up, but I'm going to try with 3 Ps: prevention, preparation, and participation. Prevention. Risk is a big deal, and it's not just probability. Risk is probability plus consequence. And in the Arctic, there are big consequences. So I see this issue of risk from my perspective, but it could apply regardless of where you are. Risk is something that many industries with high consequences, nuclear, chemical, airline industries, have faced, looked at, and reduced. You can never reduce risk completely in oil and gas arena, shipping, or anything else, but you can actually reduce it considerably if you take a systems approach and if you view the challenge as something that is a partnership between government and the regulators, between industry and labor and communities. Seeing risk as a systems problem is something that has been done in other industries like the airline industry. And yes, it has been to a certain extent in the oil and gas industry, but I would just say that we may not be the best at that, and we may have some things that we can learn from it. And for people who are really interested in this topic, I recommend a book to you, Risk Governance of Offshore Oil and Gas Operations, which was done by some really knowledgeable people in Norway, in England, in Australia, and in the United States that compare oil and gas regulatory regimes across the industrialized nations to look at what things are really working and which things aren't. And it's probably not a surprise to you to hear that a lot of what is concluded in this book in the comparison is that you need an interactive regulatory system where industry, which is constantly evolving technology and know-how, works in a partnership way with industry that is doing the regulating to make sure that what is being promised is actually being delivered. This is a push-pull, and it is something that is more along the lines of the performance-based regulatory regime, which our country is moving toward, but I would argue could move more quickly. And in the Arctic arena, just a few specific things under prevention: adopting Arctic standards that actually set a high bar as opposed to simply being okay, dealing with the liability cap, freeing up our fund from the scoring mechanism, more transparency in near misses, including incorporating leading indicators into performance-based systems. I could go on and on. Let's just say, when it comes to oil spill conversations, Most of our effort, in my opinion, has to be on risk reduction and prevention. Second point, preparation. Preparation incorporates a number of concepts, everything from research that's relevant, focused, timely, and that reflects a partnership between the private sector, the public sector, academia, and those with the money, like Department of Interior, and those who don't have the money, like NOAA, coming together, as they have been in recent years, to try to really address their common objectives in what it is that you need the research to accomplish. So preparation is in part that research, getting to know and understand what needs to be done. It's also making sure that we have the assets necessary, like an icebreaker. I mean, we have non-Arctic nations that have more icebreakers than the US has. Charting, navigational aids, that's what I mean when I say preparation. It's not like we don't know what to do. It's we lack the will to fund those things that really would make us better prepared to, in the awful circumstance of actually having to deal with a spill, whether it's shipping or oil and gas, have to do that. And third and final, participation. When I say participation, kind of similar to what Thad is saying, you have to involve local people. You have to involve folks up and down the food chain and the reporting system to really be effective. So things like the RCACs in Alaska. The Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill Commission recommended that we have RCACs elsewhere, like in the Gulf of Mexico and like in the Arctic. It doesn't have to be just like what we have done in Prince William Sound or Cook Inlet, even those are quite different. What it is an ongoing mechanism to involve local people. Yes, the planning process is a huge step forward, but it's more than planning. It's also dialogue, it's also retraining, because people change. They come and they go. Mayors come and go, believe it or not. So you need to have an ongoing effort that links up regional, local people, and federal people, and things like, oh, by the way, an Alaska Coastal Management Program would be a huge step in the right direction in my home state to make that happen. Collaboration across borders is also what I mean when I say the word participation. That's why I think that the Arctic Council and other entities that look internationally across borders, particularly in a space like the Arctic, where you need the US and Canada to be able to work together, and the US and Russia to work together, just the way Russia and Norway have worked together with Barents 2020. So participation is another code word for involvement, and it means involvement at many different levels if we are going to get to a sense of being better prepared and being able to act in case the prevention didn't work. Thank you.
Admiral Gaudier.
Thanks. I was very heartened to hear the robust conversation about prevention yesterday, and I kind of preempted myself by giving you the blowout preventer number a few minutes ago. I really meant to head off with that one. It's kind of a sobering thing to get your attention. But nevertheless, you know, all these problems go away if we are 100% on the prevention side. And I would really love to live in that world that John Rayfield describes, where we really stink at response because we haven't done it in decades. I think that's a pretty good sign of success. And, you know, I don't think we want to couch all of this in terms of offshore oil and gas exploration. We're experiencing the energy revolution now, and a lot of that's land-based. And that involves supply chains and transportation streams that are very much maritime in nature. I think I was the lucky guy who responded to the first maritime Bakken crude oil spill. We had a barge collision, mile marker 165 in the Mississippi River, and we spilled 35,000 gallons of Bakken crude oil into the river. And I mean, there but for the grace of God did it not explode. Actually, there but for the grace of Open 90 in the double hull, where you have an outer shell that has a huge gash in it, and the inner shell has a fist-sized hole, preventing that from exploding. The cargoes that we're carrying are different than the cargoes we had been carrying, and the volumes have changed. So this is a more holistic picture than just offshore oil and gas or one region versus another one. SEMS and a combination of prescriptive regulation are the way forward. The prescriptive regulations provide the absolute minimum level of compliance, and all too often that's the level that gets complied with. And I think when you look at Coast Guard progress on things like international safety management and what we're looking at for towing vessels in terms of safety management systems, we're all singing off the same sheet of music. We do, however, need to, I think, address the capital assets and resources that are available to the present and future smaller drillers. It was an eye-opener for me. The first major exercise I went to after the response was a smaller driller, and the exercise was held out of basically a mini mall office, and there were about 8 to 10 people from that company represented, and I walk in, I said, so where's everybody else, in Houston? No, you're seeing what we got here in this company. So that means we've got this cognitive dissonance between the risk that's assumed by an individual company and the resources they have and the potential spill of the future. And I'm here to tell you, we got to address this, because not everybody's going to be a BP. Not everybody's going to weigh their limits of liability. Not everybody's going to hire on the world experts and have the resources capable to pull something like this off by themselves. I think that's, that if I can leave you with anything, I think that's one that kept me up at night. In terms of the science role, I'm going to tee one up for my successor here. And so the Coast Guard does expect, through NOAA SSCs, to translate the operational science into decisions that we can be making as leaders and then implement those out in the field. That's their role. They've done it fantastically since we've established this structure. But there is a role for science. I think we've seen it operationally in some of the more oddball things we've done, from anthrax to chemical spills, the circless stuff that we do. We bring to bear the world's experts and then have that translated into functionality that, with incomplete information, the decision makers can move forward smartly. I think we need to be careful of terminology here in terms of conducting experiments during responses and the word research. Please don't use the word research when we're talking about long-term health monitoring for people who might have been exposed. I don't think that's going to go over well. It really is an imperative to monitor people who've been exposed over time and then take the lessons that we're learning in order to close health gaps for those individuals and those communities, is really what it is. And this was an experience that I got under pressure, under the gun, when dealing with the aftermath of the World Trade Center and the tragedy they had in the emergency responders for that particular incident. I see this as an organizational solution. We created things during the Deepwater Horizon for R&D, the IATAP and the ARTS process. Don't ask me to explain what the acronyms actually mean. I think GOMRI is a model that could be adjusted, where we have an organizational construct that can help filter in, give tasks, give gaps and needs to the scientific community that in a real way we can have closed. But there's also a cultural leveling that needs to take place here, and I think it did during this incident. And I really have to say to Marcia and the other folks who participated in this in an operational sense, they demonstrated a great deal of courage to break their paradigms and take the risks that had long-term consequences for their careers. Not just, we say for making mistakes, not necessarily for making mistakes, but for perception in these communities that have long-lasting consequences. So thanks very much for that. We're going to be counting on that in the future. We absolutely have to have that as operational commanders. So we had a long conversation about money, and it's not just science, it's not just R&D, it's not just community health monitoring. It's kind of the holistic needs that need to be kicked off at the very beginning of a response in order to have it address meaningful challenges that we kind of did on the fly during Deepwater Horizon. I think we need to keep this conversation open and maybe neck it down to a topical, specific conversation with the experts. We do have some bureaucratic hurdles that have been alluded to, whether that be, working with OMB and getting penalized for increasing the amount of money that goes towards these things that are within the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. There's that countervailing thing that just makes it that puts the bureaucratic brakes on, potentially doing the right thing. So wherever there's a bureaucratic hurdle, there's a bureaucratic solution, and I think that's when we need to take further offline and work on solving that one. So I'm the Chief of Governmental and Public Affairs for the Coast Guard. Is this the beginning of my 12-step program on media? I took copious notes during that time. And really, so understand the new playing field, I think we all do. I think we got an idea of what the ends are. The ways are out there, but they're ever-changing. The means are the tough nut to crack. And we have some other particular challenges that weren't specifically addressed during the media panel. And that's the fundamental mistrust of the federal government that often goes into these. And if you operate within the blogosphere, you got to be very careful that it's not viewed as propaganda, because that's just going to make the situation much worse. But I would submit that our role as government leaders in communicating and our responsibilities to do that are to address the challenges of scalability, but as we do that, there are opportunities to leverage limited resources with those who are thought leaders and emotional leaders within the community, and in monitoring the narrative and working with those key pressure points, because we don't have the resources to cover everything, in order to guide that narrative towards a factually based conversation. And I think that's our responsibility in terms of transparency, is to make sure that the facts are out there and that we're educating folks on how this is done. It's not to counter necessarily, but it's to shape the conversation. And so I pledge that I'm going to get together with Mary Landry after this, and I think we need to take a larger interagency look. I like the idea of kind of busting the paradigm of the JIC, the long-standing JIC structure, and working to reinvent that. So I got that one, another Coast Guard term, FORAC, for action. Legal, we need to address the liabilities. So the lawsuits, especially when it comes to dispersant use, I think have hampered us greatly on potential usage of a tool that can be used under the right circumstances in the future. This indemnification that the dispersant providers are now asking for are striking fear in the hearts of OSROs and potentially responsible parties. And we need to get beyond that to make sure that that tool is ready and available at a moment's notice during an emergency to use it. And then finally, about exercises and preparedness. So who of us here have been parts of exercises where we go through the checklist, yep, set the operational period, yep, did the objectives, yep, had the initial incident unified command meeting, yep, moving on to create the incident action plan, check, 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 done, all objectives met, thumbs up. Nobody. Okay. There's an opportunity here, and it's a compelling need with limited resources to target those areas where we're weak. Some examples: sensor integration and COP creation. I think we have tremendous opportunities with technology to get beyond the soda straw, looking at a parcel of ocean, which is what we suffered with, to think the big ideas like we did with controlling the airspace using the Air Force resources and doing something there. We need to exercise volunteer integration and NGO integration. We had discussions about bringing folks into the JIC. We're not going to know how that works until we actually try it, and in doing so, build that trust necessary to succeed in the future. Community engagement is something, we got to practice the things that we're not the greatest at, but hold the greatest risk for us in the future, and that's one of them. And then social media and shaping the narrative, I think, is a great opportunity for an exercise to get us all together and get better at that. And then finally, logistics integration, where we're really stretched and we've got different entities with just different supply chains and scarce resources working through area commands, is something that we stand to gain great ground on if we can practice it. Thanks very much.
Marcia McNutt.
Okay, well, no surprise to anyone, I'm going to confine my remarks to the issues of science and communication. Number one, Chris Reddy, during his remarks, made the statement, didn't have a seat at the table. And I was thinking in my mind, what table? Where was there a table? And it occurred to me that for many of us who were working on the spill, we were so busy worrying about the problems that we were dealing with, the tactical problems, that we had a little time to worry about setting a table for someone else to come into. So I thought to myself, what we need to do is set the table in advance of the emergency. So I was talking to Kate Clark from NOAA, and she had the perfect solution to it. She mentioned something called the North Cape spill, I think it was called, where what resulted from it was an MOA or an MOU between NOAA and a local research institution that looked to me like it could be a template for the future, because it laid out within that agreement, which was called Scientific Support for Environmental Emergency Response, and it laid out the responsibilities on one hand of the research institute to let NOAA know what their capabilities were, what kind of personnel they had available to provide scientific support, and NOAA, on the other hand, to let them know what sort of needs they would have, what kind of support they would require, and also to provide funding if they needed help from the research organization. And I thought that if in advance of an emergency, the NOAA SSCs went around to various coastal research laboratories and had these MOUs in place, that they could be activated in a time of an emergency, this table would be set in advance. And if the emergency, like an oil spill, actually elevated to a spill of national significance, then rather than just deal with the local institute, then institutions from outside the local area could also be brought in. And I thought this instrument was so generic for emergencies that they could be adopted by other agencies as well. For example, USGS for earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, FEMA for floods, et cetera. There's nothing in them that is specific to an oil spill. And it didn't preclude, for example, NSF giving out rapid research grants for blue sky research that doesn't directly align with response priorities and might lead to something out of the box that proves to be very helpful. But I thought this would sort of address Chris's concern. So that's point number one. Point number two. It seems like everyone is in agreement that this idea of an actionable review process to get some sort of peer review that's overnight or whatever is a good idea. But no one has yet stepped forward and said, I'll test drive the concept. So we need someone to do that. So I thought, this needs to be done before the next emergency so we can work out the bugs. So here's my idea. The ideal opportunity would be during one of these scenario planning exercises that's coming up, like an Arctic oil spill scenario planning exercise, where people are sitting around a table going through an operational exercise saying, okay, what's happening next? What are decisions that need to be made? How is science coming into it? How's that science going to be vetted? Okay, so if it's an Arctic spill that's happening, you need a slate of reviewers that you'd have to have. Where do you get that slate of reviewers? Well, who would possibly have a broad suite of people with expertise over all of the science and engineering things that would come up? Oh, a journal, Okay, so maybe you would come to science and say, we're doing a spill scenario. Could you give us a possible list of people who might want to help out with the scenario and would be willing to be our test reviewers to give actionable peer review for our scenario? And yes, science would be happy to help you out with that if you want to try that out. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, communication. My proposal here is I think each agency should have a communication plan that is updated at least annually. And as new communication channels open up, such as Twitter, that should include a training program that ensures that the communicators are comfortable using those new channels, and a protocol that assures that appropriate vetting and fact-checking is obtained in a timely manner for those new channels. And as we know, for something like Twitter, the key is the retweets. Peter's right that agencies might not have much credibility. If an agency, something like NOAA Twitter, puts out a tweet, people may look at that and say, who's NOAA Twitter? This looks like agency propaganda. But I think individuals within agencies can build up more credibility if they're trusted, but not if they just start tweeting during an emergency. They've got to be tweeting for years before the emergency, and they build up credibility and they build up followers. You can't just start tweeting during the emergency. What's even better is, I think, the way NASA does it. If you look at the way NASA does social media, they actually have something called NASA Social. And at all their events, they save the front row of seats for NASA Social. These are people outside of NASA, but who are tightly connected to their internal PR department, and they get a front row seat at every NASA event, and they tweet for NASA. And they get the NASA party line, and they tweet it, but they aren't NASA people, so they have all sorts of credibility. Everyone needs a NOAA social or a Coast Guard social who is putting out your party line, but they aren't considered part of you, so they have credibility. That's what you need. Okay, my 4th point is information. I think we need to go to Big Data 2.0, because right now, I think it was Charlie who made the point. We're gathering a lot of data on a lot of these places, but they're all in different databases. There's the biological database, there's the bathymetry database, there's the oceanography database. We need to find some way to do crosscuts through all these databases so that they're all linked spatially, so it's easy when someone goes into one area to be able to cross-link all the information that you need for an area so that you can get Big Data 2.0 that is temporally and spatially linked to what you need, regardless of the database that it originally resides in. And this shouldn't be rocket science. Someone's got to be able to do this. I don't know who, but someone. Okay. And then finally, my last point, and I think maybe this falls under boundary organizations, but it has to do with who do you trust. And as we've said, I think a lot of good data comes out of our government organizations about is the water safe? Is the beach safe? Is the seafood safe? But yet there's still a lot of questions that the public has. But there are a lot of boundary organizations that people view as trusted organizations. For example, you know, I'm from Monterey, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium, everyone trusts their seafood watch card for where you go for trusted information on seafood. In fact, it's on my cell phone. Every time I go to order seafood, I get my seafood watch card up, and it geolocates me, and it tells me right now, because I'm in New Hampshire, what is the safe seafood in New Hampshire. So why not make an arrangement with either the Monterey Bay Aquarium or some other aquaria to take NOAA information and run it through Monterey Bay Aquarium, so Safe Seafood Information is a partnership with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, or Safe Beaches is a partnership with something like the Surfrider Foundation or something like that. These groups would love it because it drives traffic to their website, and then people donate money and they become members and they make lots of money and they are successful. So they would love it. Anyway, okay, that's it for me.
I have a couple slides that I wanted to quickly go through, but I'm going to tie it into my, sort of path forward comments. So I think over the last 2 days, we've talked about disasters and how they really drive some good policy outcomes. Unfortunately, it takes disasters. After the Exxon Valdez, we saw, the best response and prevention capability in the world in Prince William Sound. After the Deepwater Horizon, even though we didn't have legislation, we were able to, I think the agencies really stepped up. And they really took on the role of saying, okay, what do we need to do since Congress didn't do it? There still are things, I believe, that Congress needs to do, and I hope one day they will. But I do think that the agencies under this administration has gone a long way towards trying to improve, like, safety and environmental monitoring, and, I think that there's a commitment and really a different culture by the leadership. That could change. And that's why legislation is important. But I think there has been improvements, and I can say that because I've been watching pretty closely since the Deepwater Horizon. It's not perfect. But we need the political will and the vision to actually make changes where risk is high right now in the Arctic. We haven't had a disaster there, and I don't want a disaster in order to have change and the kinds of protections that we need. So, I think Fran did a great job this morning talking about the Arctic and pointing out all of the aspects of it that make it so challenging. Drilling is a big challenge. Shipping, we don't get to decide whether those vessels go through the Bering Strait and through the Aleutian Islands or not. And the IMO is barely struggling with getting their polar code done. And we're relying on these international organizations who, it's the least common denominator kind of an approach to these standards. So what I guess I would take the next slide. I think that the drilling season that we saw in 2012, I hate to pick on Shell because I think there were some good things that they did, but I also think that we really learned a lot from their 2012 season. Most of you in this room are aware that they couldn't get their containment system. After the Deepwater Horizon, the one biggest improvement that we learned is that you can cap and contain a blowout through a capping system, either a capping stack or a capping system. And when they tried to test their capping system in Bellingham, Washington, not in the Arctic, they were unable to get it to work. And there were many failures of that season, but on the, we all know this, but I feel that I must say it, as the rig was leaving Dutch Harbor to go home in December, which any mariner in Alaska would never do, they hit the rocks in Kodiak. And I think that really tells us that there is a lot to learn, and we may not be quite ready this season to go into the Arctic Ocean. So, next slide, please. People have talked about Arctic standards, and I want to talk about that for just one moment, because I think there were some really good points came up yesterday about integrity of the well and how do you really make good decisions. And I've learned from Thad Allen and also Marcia McNutt about, you can't just tighten down all the valves and call it good. You don't know what will happen to that subsurface well if you do that. So one of the things that we have said is source control is the most important thing. Prevention, of course, first with blowout preventers and backup blowout preventers, which Shell did provide, double ram shears they did provide, but the but the containment system in the Arctic, with a drilling relief rig in the Arctic. You cannot cascade equipment into the Arctic in September or October. It's too late. The ice will move in. You cannot get a drill rig up there. You cannot move your containment system. Though that equipment needs to be located in the Arctic, and it needs to have a performance standard that requires that that equipment is in place, operating within a certain period of time. I like to say 24 hours. I'd take 72 hours. But we need a performance standard that requires that. Seasonal drilling restrictions. There's been a lot of talk about ice in the Arctic. I think the most important thing that you can do is make sure you get out before the ice moves in, especially during exploration, because you have a floating vessel and there's a lot of reasons why you will need to get out of there. I think that having, I lost my frame of thought for a second, having polar class vessels are still important because, as we know, Shell, when they moved up there to drill in the Arctic, the first thing they saw was a gigantic ice flow that was quite large, and they had to move the rig off the site and then move it back. They were successful, I will say, at doing that. But there's still a lot of uncertainty about drilling in the Arctic, even as the ice melts, because there's more uncertainty and bigger storms. You don't know when you're going to run into the ice, and you don't know when the storms are going to hit because you don't have the protection of the ice that helps to calm the seas. So those are some of the Arctic standards we've been talking about, and I want to give credit to Bessie and Bohm for putting together. I have not yet seen the regs, so I'm going to hold my full applause until I do. But, you know, they've been through a process. They've made a decision that they are going to impose Arctic-specific standards. I think that's a very important first step. But I wanted to be clear about things like, if you're going, and I meant to say this about seasonal drilling restrictions, you need to be able to get out of the Arctic with enough time that if you had a spill or a blowout, you could drill a relief well in that time. And right now, there's, no, am I not being clear? You're clear. Okay, there's got to be enough time backed out so that you can actually move out before the ice moves in and actually drill the relief well. Sorry. I will move on because I can't remember all of the details. Anyway, Ed did a great job of the Arctic shipping discussion, and we're working very closely with him. We are very lucky to have, I think, a public servant who works for the industry on shipping in Alaska, because he really understands from the Coast Guard's perspective and from the public's perspective what is needed to, and I'm sure, I don't sit in his meetings, but I'm sure he gives those shipping companies a hard time, and he tells them, look, Maryland is breathing down my neck. We got to get more equipment, we got to get a better plan, and he's making very good first strides, but there's much more to do on shipping. There are hunters that are trying to hunt up there. Gigantic ships coming through, cannot see them. They want to know when those ships are coming through, so they don't try to go hunting when those ships are coming through. There's black water and gray water and marine mammal strikes. There are many concerns about shipping in the Arctic that need to be addressed. So I'm ready for the next slide. What we have done is come up with some of the ideas of what we think. We hope that the Coast Guard will be coming out with the port access route study here by the end of the month. And I know they've been really wanting to do it, but because of the situation with Russia, there's been a little bit of a delay. But shipping lanes, we don't have, Noah already said, we don't have the charting, we don't have really good weather information, and we have limited communication systems. I mean, it is the last frontier, and we need shipping lanes, we need areas to be avoided, not to protect necessarily the vessels, but to protect the critically important ecological areas. And so those are, some of the items that we've been working on to ensure that there is better, what we call standards of care for shipping in the Arctic. And then just finally, I wanted to say, I agree with many of the things that have been said on this panel. I think citizens need to be involved in oversight. We don't need legislation to do that. The RCAC that was created in Prince William Sound they set up their own nonprofit organization, and they made people listen to them. They did later get funding through Open 90, but they started out as their own organization, and they're very proud of that fact that they did. And I think that there can be other citizens' councils that are created if people are given the will and then the support that they need. The need for fully funded alert regulatory agencies. I feel like I always have to say this because I was a regulator at one time in my life, and I worked for the legislature at another time, and I've worked for a governor. But it's very easy to say the job-killing EPA. It's very easy to say, these regulations are impacting our economic, viability. But it's not easy to say we need these strong regulations to make sure our citizens are safe, that the water is safe, that we are operating in a very responsible way. And the people who are the regulators, the people who are the legislators and the members of Congress and the appointees in the government who actually support that kind of approach, they are the unsung heroes of this country. And they're not appreciated nearly the way they should be. And I can go on and on about that. But I feel like we somehow have to tell people, if it weren't for NOAA, or if it weren't for USGS, we wouldn't have maps in this country. If it weren't for NOAA, we wouldn't have, weather, predictions. Google takes Google, you look up what's it going to do today, rain, and Google takes, or whatever app on your phone takes credit. Well, it's actually NOAA who provides that information every day. So that's my very quick pitch, and I have a lot more things I could say, but I think I've done enough for today.
This next speaker is someone we haven't seen up on the dais before, and this is Greg DeMarco from ExxonMobil, who's also API's chair of the Spills Advisory Group.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks to you, CRRC, and the University of New Hampshire for putting on a great event here. I think I speak for everyone up here and probably everyone in the room that you really have brought together, a unique group and laid out some comprehensive issues for us to discuss in a productive manner. So kudos to you for being that honest broker that you are in all of this. And thanks for kind of putting me up here and letting me listen carefully for 2 days. I don't think I've ever listened quite as hard at a conference as I have these last 2 days because of my role to help sum things up here. So I'm going to cover a couple themes or things I think I've heard kind of over and over from folks just to reinforce those, and then a few action items. And for those that know me well, I'm kind of all about the verbs. So Nancy, when I go through them, I'm going to highlight the verbs that kind of signify the action items where I think industry can kind of get behind early on. So in terms of themes, and we've all heard it, prevention, prevention, prevention. Industry does focus a lot of its gray matter on the prevention sphere. I'm not going to say any more about it, but it is front and central to us. It is all about systematic risk reduction, and certainly that is something that never should belong in the too hard locker, as that would indicate. Mitigation, that's another area that we've focused on extensively in the last couple of years, both domestically and internationally, and that's all the capping and containment activities and those additional barriers that we've kind of laid out on the consequence side of that bow tie. In terms of response, and I think these are consensus items, but all the tools in the toolbox. We're battling physics out there. Mother Nature can be a challenging or worthy adversary. There are safety issues out there. We really do need to take a holistic approach to the oil spill. The NEBA framework is a good one. I think we need to use it before and during spill events. Thinking about NEBA well in advance certainly expedites the decision-making process during the actual event. To that point, pre-approvals are key. You know, time is your enemy out there, so really do need to focus on pre-approvals where we can in advance and ensure we've got some checks built into the Unified Command decision-making process during the event itself. But the more work you can do up front, certainly the better. While there are still a lot of unanswered questions out there, there has been and continues to be an extensive amount of research done both domestically and internationally. Much of that research has been done in concert with government and academia. You know, we're all working hard to help translate that technical information, those results, into a manner that's more easily digestible by the general public. So, and the human dimension is central. I mean, we've heard that over and over again. They do need and deserve a voice throughout the process, and you know, we need to focus on them during the aftermath as well. And this concept of peer listening is one that really caught my eye, and I'd certainly like to learn a little bit more about that and take that back to my brethren in industry to talk about further. So 4 areas, actually 5, I added one here at the end just as we were talking about, which again is a bit of reinforcement, but continue to invest in technology that serves as a force multiplier. And what I'm referring to here is things like remote sensing, you know, X-band radar, UAVs, aerostats, you know, really guiding those assets to the thick oil and allowing them to stay there longer. You know, that's a critical force multiplier. Similarly, you know, it's all about encounter rate on the mechanical recovery side. We've all heard that, but these fast advancing boom systems, you know, enhanced booming configurations, things of that nature continue to deserve a lot of our attention and focus. A number of people, including Admiral Gautier, have mentioned the common operating picture. That certainly helps us convert information into wisdom in kind of a real-time manner. So the cloud is an item that Admiral Allen mentioned as well, and that's certainly something that I think can help with big data, can help with common operating pictures. So focusing on some of those technologies, as well as continuing to make advancements in, you know, alternative technologies or dispersants and in situ burning. And industry does have a fairly large commitment still underway on both those fronts. And again, most of those projects are being worked in concert with other stakeholders, federal and academia. Second one, science matters, and we need to find a way to elevate science in the decision-making process. And I think this is important both before and during an event. And a couple specifics that I tagged here is Nancy mentioned the CRRC dispersant use in the Arctic workshop that they're planning out in Seattle early in next year, I think, where they're going to get scientists together by themselves to kind of agree on the set of peer-reviewed literature that's out there on that topic. No politics, no press, just the scientists. And then they'll take that information, and I don't know much about the next step, but I think they'll be involving stakeholders in Alaska in how to use that information on a go-forward basis. So from an industry standpoint, certainly supportive of that, and I know you've already reached out to us for our participation in that. One of the presentations I'd probably learned the most about here was Chris Reddy's presentation about the role of academia and some of the incentives and challenges that they face. And you know, I think one thing industry can do very easily, and I'd look to do it in my company, is invite the academics to participate more regularly in our drills and exercises. In fact, if Chris was here, I definitely want to take this opportunity to invite him to one of Exxon Mobil's next events and gives that same presentation during our kind of orientation to that, because I think it would be very educational, and I think you'd get a better understanding for how we do things on the industry side of the equation. And then during the event, and again, I'll second or third what Marcia had to say about this actionable peer review process, a peer review process that fits that all-important battle rhythm that we've spoken about. So some more thinking and specifics on that, and if you need industry to participate in rolling up our sleeves on that, we'd be happy to do so. We've talked about, Valdez and raising the bar on tanker spills, and Deepwater Horizon raising the bar on offshore events, but certainly the inland sphere is an active one these days. I think we do, without taking our eye off the ball on those other ones, need to refocus on the inland environment as well. There is some work underway between API and the American Association of Railroads to advance the ball there, to help develop training materials for first responders, to look at geographic response plans, to participate more fully in each other's drills and exercises. So good stuff there. I think one area that we're lacking there is better interaction and participation with EPA and PHMSA. We have great regular interaction with Coast Guard, NOAA, BSEE, but it's a little bit more of a struggle with us to get EPA and PHMSA to engage. And I know they're resource constrained, but we probably need to work harder on our end to do so. And I think one thing I'd like to do is maybe visit your inland spills training class and encourage, again, my brethren in industry to do that more systematically. Also, that idea of reinvigorating that freshwater conference sounds like a good one, so I can take that back to the subcommittee that I sit in API and try to get the read on that opportunity. And when I say industry in that capacity, I really should refer to both the oil industry and the rail industry, who are obviously the responsible party for a rail-related event, but we're certainly partners in that effort, particularly when it's our crude oil. The fourth item is a bit of a recurring theme, and certainly the importance of leadership and cooperation. Admiral Allen has referred to the concept of unity of effort and integration at the top of the unified command. I know the federal government has taken some steps recently to take their senior leadership and put them through a concept called meta leadership training that's run out of a National Preparedness Leadership Institute or initiative in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I visited with them earlier this week to understand a little bit more about that program and how industry could benefit from that. But I'd certainly look forward to ongoing dialogue about raising the bar in terms of that leadership in complex dynamic situations. And the last one that I added just at the end, because I've been really concerned about this concept of credibility and trust that has been lost. And we all have some ground to make up in that area, but certainly, as Marcia indicated, exploring greater use of these boundary organizations to help achieve that trust and credibility, at least through them up front, and then maybe eventually that a little bit of that comes back to all the entities up here on the dais who again have some ground to make up in that regard. So those are some hopefully actionable items there, Nancy, with a couple verbs thrown in there for good measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Our next speaker is Mary Landry, who is the Director of Incident Management and Preparedness at the Coast Guard.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy, and it's really great to be here, and I certainly have taken this last 2 days, taken copious notes, and I promised Nancy and all of you that regardless of what we mention up here, we have a lot of ideas jotted down, and we've already agreed that we will continue to work on things. So if something you proffered as a suggestion wasn't mentioned or isn't mentioned by the time we reach the end of the table with David, I just assure you that we are paying attention to everything that was said. It's been a really fruitful couple days for all of us. I want to just take us back a little bit for a second. Gary started us off with the history of oil spills, and it was so great because I always describe our work as an evolutionary journey. And the way I describe it for people, and I don't know if all of you have heard this in the room, but it's important for this group particularly to understand this evolutionary journey. If I take it back to Exxon Valdez and what came out of Exxon Valdez, and the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which was a negotiated rulemaking assisted by Congress and passed unanimously, but the negotiated rulemaking process involved stakeholder engagement across the country and really, really aggressive work and making sure that it wasn't just the regulators sitting behind the room writing the regulations. So to come up with a process called a negotiated rulemaking, the OPA 90 legislation, is the foundation around and the nucleus around which we formed. Not only did I use it in the B-120 oil spill in Buzzards Bay, but we did use it as a basis around which we formed for the Deepwater Horizon. The other point that's important that everybody might not have known is when we approached 9/11 in the post-9/11 world, and we wrote the Maritime Transportation Security Act, and we worked with International on the ISPIS, the International Ship and Port Security Code, the basis and design of that legislation was the same concept. How do you take federal, state, local, private sector, NGO, academia, global. How do you take the elements of all of these and bring them together? And when we did the MTSA regulations, it shouldn't be lost on us that we went from an area committee to an area maritime security committee. And I share that with you because I really give this body of people that have been involved, many of you given your whole life to this work, I just give you credit for what you've done as what I call a national good that goes well beyond just oil spill response and gas explosions. It goes well beyond. It's an all hazards approach. So I do have to thank the commission. There was a bill it created. I did not plan on coming out of retirement, but when they made the offer, I couldn't resist. And the reason I couldn't resist is the passion I have for the work we do in all incident hazards preparedness and management. And I think we need to remember how much everybody during Deepwater Horizon gave, every organization gave. The people from Maine were helping Florida in their emergency operations center through emergency management. NOAA recalled everybody from retirement, no vacations, everybody all hands on deck. The Weather Service had to give increased weather reporting. The EPA worked with the state to do air and water monitoring beyond what the state was normally doing. There were so many things that agents, the NGA, I mean, the truck was on the dock there in Robert with the best capabilities that we have in geospatial, that everything was there at our fingertips. How can we take and leverage this capability that has a classified domain, highly classified, but then how can we take this stuff and translate it to an unclassified domain and use it for this domestic incident? So there were extraordinary measures taken by many people. Many of you in this room were involved. And I think I would challenge any country to do it better than we did when we reached its peak. It was actually, I believe, 47,000 people at its height, multi-billion-dollar response. It clearly eclipsed in scale and scope anything we envisioned when we did Open 90, but the truth of the matter was Open 90 did form the foundation and the basis and continues to be a good model. Where I see now where we have to go going forward, and I will get specific to the 4 categories Nancy charted us with, but I want to mention everything we've been involved in, and I think Admiral Allen has said this many times, all the lessons he learned, whether it was Elian Gonzalez or, Cuba mass migration, all the things he's done throughout his career, he takes the lessons from those incidents and he pays it forward to the next one. So as we sat at Deepwater Horizon, we were using airspace management that was used in Haiti. We were using things that were used in Katrina, the lessons of Katrina. Many things were used and applied. And then you look at the authorities, and I vividly remember the discussion with the cabinet level. Admiral Allen was in the room, Lisa Jackson, the EPA administrator, Secretary Napolitano, the White House was on the phone in the very first week. This is actually before Admiral Allen was even named the NIC. There was a discussion, is this a Stafford Act response, because it's a national crisis, or is this an Open 90? And my suggestion to Secretary Napolitano, and I didn't make this decision, but it's just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have a law, we have a structure in place, we have a responsible party. Now, looking back now, I would say we need to look at that national response framework and say, how might we have leveraged it better? Because even though we didn't apply Stafford Act, there are things FEMA came down and helped us with. Family assistance centers were designed for community outreach. I think we have to take that national response framework and the work we do in the day-to-day hurricanes and tornadoes and everything and make sure we're taking the lessons learned in that community and applying them in this community if they're logical. I think about tech for disaster. So let's go ahead and go forward with the 4 categories. The role of science and this technology that could have been leveraged is clearly important. I've heard since this bill that NOAA is looking at a technology that could have given us a subsea read on what was being emitted from the well. There's actually a technology in development. Wouldn't that have been nice in the first days to be able to say, this is how much is being emitted, rather than take our guesses and have BP give us a number and then have that number be different. And, I think that was a painful lesson. And even though Pete Gauthier said, don't give the amount, I would tell you that if we didn't give the amount, we would have been challenged for not knowing. And there would have been severe criticism of government for that. But regardless, there are technologies that we know exist now that we really need to bring online so that we don't go through that difficult flow rate technical group that had to pull together all the information they could and try to, really have a credible answer for what is flowing from the well. I certainly also take Chris Reddy's lecture to heart because I understood some of the elements of academia, but I didn't truly appreciate the cultural piece until he gave his presentation. And I always described Deepwater Horizon, it was like a corporate merger on the fly, because even though the industry knows incident command system and and we all know incident command system, and the states work with us and they know it, I would tell you that everybody's culture of incident command system is a little different, and how you take these cultures and you have a corporate merger on the fly, and then I liken it to BP would have thought it was a hostile takeover at times, not a corporate merger. But regardless, it was taking place, and we had the Senate and the Congress, we had representatives come down because they do represent, the Hill does represent the American people, and they were part of this dialogue. And so as you take all these cultures and all these orientations and you bring them together to get unity of effort, if you don't understand their culture, and I admit through all my years, I understood NOAA's culture, I know EPA's culture pretty well, I knew the state. I introduced myself to every governor in the Gulf Coast before this incident because of a hurricane season. You understand their cultures. But in the midst of a crisis like that, it brings out the best in people, and it sometimes brings out the not so good. I don't want to say the worst, but it challenges people. So I would say that understanding cultures and how we could do it with this Chris Reddy suggestion is to take our incident command system and our area plans and how we do tribal liaison and we do state liaison and we do all these other liaisons. I think we absolutely, and we have an environmental unit, I think we absolutely have to have an academic unit and an understanding and train and exercise with them to understand the culture. On the media side, that's an interesting one. Where do I start? The truth of the matter is I loved when it was Justin Kenny, I think, who said Exxon Valdez happened in the Walter Cronkite days. And it is a totally different world now with social media and the technologies. And I think rather than be fearful of that or feel like we're challenged by it, I do think we can leverage it. And certainly I look at Marcia McNutt's social media tool that she's using, and that Alan's talking about I knew we did Google Alert and all that, but there's other things that are on the horizon, whether it's tech for disaster. I watched a lot of great things with technology in Sandy, how to find open gas stations and things like that. I think there are technologies we can leverage to a better effect. I will say, though, we also have to be it was great to see Ann Thompson, and I will say that there is that challenge of getting everybody will use the media, and I think we have to be honest about that and understand that, because when you talk about the seafood safety example of how hard it was to convince people that the seafood was safe, I know that there were objectives in the media, and some of them were to make sure seafood was safe so people would start eating the seafood again. And then there was other times when the objective was to pressure BP to give them more money for something, and the message in that effort from the same person was different. So that confuses the public when you have messages that are different. That alignment piece is so key. So I think leveraging the technology, but also the alignment, and it's got to be alignment across various scenarios, whether it's seafood safety or alignment on dispersant use, and how you get that alignment. You're not, in the midst of the crisis is not the time to work on that alignment. It absolutely has to be in advance. So I think the work they're talking about doing on dispersants for the Arctic and for other places is really critical. The human dimension. We have a volunteer policy for engagement, and I honestly, I've been involved in spills. The B-120 oil spill, as I mentioned, as I walked the beach with Governor Romney, that plan called for an environmental group to be the volunteer coordinator. So we had an environmental group in the command post with us as the volunteer coordinator, which was fabulous because it really had everybody had a role. And they did a great job with engaging the communities and trying to leverage them to feel like they were a part of it. But I don't think we organized it enough, and then I don't think we really understood and engaged enough on the community on the mental health piece. And that was not even, it's not even written into the legislation. BP provided the funding, but I think that's something that going forward, I would look to the responsible party, and I would look to the government, even, a FEMA or whoever, and say, if we don't have a responsible party, we have to build the mental health piece from square one. And the point they made there, and the reason I put this under the volunteer policy, is it was either LaJohn Swan or Dwayne Gill who mentioned, you can't just send anybody out there to the local community when you talk about mental health. It's really important to understand the local community aspects and who they trust and who they will go to tell them the challenges and their needs. So I think that's an important thing of how we look at that and how we take the human dimension and certainly build on that. As far as the public policy and the politics, I looked at what David Kennedy said and what Chris Reddy said as well, but and certainly we applaud Pete Gauthier. It's so ironic because when I was going down as the district commander, I called Pete and said, would you be the sector commander in Louisiana? And he wasn't ready then, but he got there eventually, which was fabulous. And we had a great, very experienced sector commander at the time of the spill. But the truth of the matter is, getting people in the room to learn about this is key. We've had 3 SONS exercises 3 years in a row, and we've brought executive leadership in the DC area, and we've also brought people down from Alaska, and the focus has been the Arctic. And it's really been helpful to try to give them the context of, you don't know when this is going to be really important to you, so I know you have a busy schedule, and I know this is difficult to devote this 3 hours, but we really strongly encourage you to do it. And now we're trying to throw out a carrot. Greg mentioned the API and AAR, American Association of Rail, getting together, and that's so important. But we really have to look at this energy renaissance in the U.S. and what it means to us simultaneous with what we see in the Arctic, because everything is local, and even though the Arctic is a precious resource and a very important and logistically very challenging, I do think the energy renaissance domestically has worked for us. So how do we bridge getting the politicians and the political appointees? I don't want to just say much politics. We have career people in these agencies, and then we have political appointees, and we have to really encourage both to be at the table, because part of it is not only that do politics change out or political appointees change out, but we are getting long in the tooth, some of us, and the next generation has to be brought along, and we really have to take this body of work that many have been involved in and make sure it's institutionalized, formalized, and that next generation is carrying it forward, because who knows who will be around when the next thing happens. The other point I wanted to make with that's somewhat important is, like for instance, rail put in $25 billion they invested in the rail infrastructure. That's how much they see this rail renaissance coming. But as far as our SONS exercise and getting the people at the table, I just want to reinforce that it isn't just the 3 hours we're sitting in the room. There has been a body of work. And I think what we all learned in Deepwater Horizon, what we all learned was the knife edge had grown dull across the board, because we had focused our risk on post 9/11 world, and we had felt like we had done better in tank vessel spills and facility response plans and all the work we had done. We were kind of feeling a little bit like, okay, we've got other risks, our resource constraints are tight, so we're going to apply our resources elsewhere. I can tell you that was probably a clarion call for so many people to say, even though you're resource constrained, and we are all resource constrained, we still have to leverage what we have available to us. And so there's a body of work that's gone on in those 3 years that we've done the SONS work. And the important thing is we have people at the table like GSA who wouldn't have been at a SONS exercise 5 years ago, who are looking at what would the logistics requirements be in the Arctic. We have the Department of Defense at the table. Okay, how do we do sea-based support to civil authorities? How would we do these things in the Arctic? So I think the clarion call of Deepwater Horizon for our nation was that everybody looks and says, if the knife edge grows dull across the board in our risks of all hazards, we really need to leverage each other, whether it's a New Madrid earthquake and USGS and others doing work there, or California, you name it, whatever the hazard is that we face, we really need to leverage the capabilities. So the work we're going to do to answer the mail for Nancy in the role of science, in the media, in the human dimension, in public policy and politics, I can assure you is work that can be applied across the board. And we're all very committed to it. So I think I'll stop there. I think I've said enough. And certainly I've thoroughly enjoyed being with all of you for the last couple days. And like I said, taking copious notes and learning from all of you on what you all contributed and will continue to contribute. Thank you.
Allison Anderson is the Associate Director of Strategic Engagement at Bessie. Allison?
All tough acts to follow. Okay, so how's everybody doing? We got 40 minutes. Can we hang tight? Maybe everybody get a yawn out, because I noticed there was some group fatigue and the herd's thinning a little bit. So just everybody wake up. I want to start by telling you a quick story, and maybe this will make some of you smile. I know it'll make one person smile. About 2 years ago, about the same time, it was around the election time, there was a smart man that I was having a conversation and offering some advice to, who wanted to speak open and publicly about offshore risk. And I said, oh, sir, maybe at this point in time, it's not really the best time to talk about offshore risk. Because he said to me, but it's a really risky business, Allison. And I said, I get that. I get that. We can quantify a lot of these risks. But maybe for this particular venue, we should talk about some of the good things that we're doing after Macondo. So we had this conversation back and forth. And at the time, I was deeply fearful of digital media. So these are two things that are going to give you a preview. That man is Jim Watson, and he's going to get to hear me talk today about risk openly. And it's something that I really changed my mind about in the time that I've been working at the Bureau. And I think it shows, because I'm not a stubborn person, and Jim's convinced me of many things over the last couple of years. But I will say there are people that are really reluctant to change their minds about things and how they talk about things and how they communicate with people, and that's a common theme across this panel and the whole day that I've seen here. And so I want to show that old dogs can learn new tricks. So the Bureau that I work for is one that, as everyone knows, was sort of born out of a failure. Okay, it was a failure that everybody knows about, and we don't need to beat that dead horse. I really appreciate what you said, Jim, in remembering the 11 people who did die in that incident. I think that's really important, that people don't get so black and white about what the risks are and the tangible outcomes of such high-risk events when failures do happen. I recently had a conversation with a very high-level person. I'm not going to say who they worked for, but they said to me, and we were talking about Native Alaskans, and he said, it's all right, we can write them a check if the containment fails. And my heart broke, okay? And I sat there and I said, I think the conversation is over, okay? Because you can't write a check for a human life. You can't, okay? We can quantify them from a probabilistic standpoint, but you absolutely can't do that. And if we get to that point in this conversation, when we think about preparedness and prevention and oil spill response, and it comes down to costs and basically resource allocation after event occurs, I think we've all kind of failed. It's a societal failure at that point. So that's really me being on a personal soapbox right now and opening up a little bit, but it's really important, and I took a moment and I caught my breath after being completely shocked by this gentleman's statement, and I said, well, let me talk to you about risks, and let me talk to you about how the people up in Native Alaska who work up there and depend on whaling need to get that whale that season, and how writing them a check, they don't have a bank that you can cash it at, okay? So let's think about them as real people. And we actually re-engaged in a completely different way in terms of how we communicated. We took it out of the black and white picture, and we brought real people and the consequences of their actions, and we talked about risk. So that's my framing here. So everything that Fran said, I'm going to say amen to, and you're going to hear the same themes come across in what I'm saying. I basically have two recommendations. The first one is a greater focus on risk. Thank you, Jim, okay? I think all of the federal family needs to focus on quantifying risk and managing risk for overall just systemic government risk reduction, okay? Not just for oil spills, all right? We see risk, Admiral Gautier had just said, given many instances, he's talked about Ebola, he's talked about other responses where we've faced huge government risk, and we always struggle to deal with that. And so I think that's something overall we really need to do a better job of. So let me talk about Bessie. I want to leave things on a higher note, and then hopefully give it to Dave, and he can continue a high note on things that people, Dave's been kind of getting beat up here in terms of NOAA, if you hadn't noticed. So
I'm reluctant to change my mind.
So I want to leave it on a positive note, and some of the themes that you've heard, I want to tell you about what we're doing at the Bureau. In the past 3 years that we have been a newer Bureau, we've focused on risk by focusing on technology and people. It's not one or the other. It's really important that you remember that people are always essential. Yes, with Macondo, the BOP failed, but it was so much more than that. There were people at the helm who maybe couldn't identify its use or know if it was being used right, or didn't put it through the right tests ahead of time. In particular, let's talk about prevention for a moment here, since we're here to talk about oil spill response. Let's prevent them from happening in the first place. That's our first goal. So we work at Bessie to prevent spills from happening, and there is actually risk in pretty much every offshore operation you can have. Some are very small, nearly infinitesimal, but they're still there and they're still small. Some are very large, and we really work hard to quantify those now. We're quantifying our own organizational risk. A risk enterprise is something we're undertaking. We're doing long-term strategic planning. It's actually very important as a federal agency that we engage in long-term visioning and future scenarios so that we can be a nimble and responsive regulator when things like this do happen. We live in a world of rapidly changing technologies, and that includes all of the offshore technologies and equipment. Operators are pushing into harder to reach areas. There's high pressure and high temperature wells out there that always make me a little bit nervous, but they're very exciting. Exciting new prospects are out on the horizon, ultra deep water settings. And I think several people on this panel have done an excellent job about framing the challenges associated with drilling in the Arctic. New technologies have to be developed if we want to keep operations safe and if we want to lower risk. I just skipped ahead. Technology is failing me. I think it's user error. So there's my technology human nexus here. Okay, let me get back to this. So we want to also ensure that we are managing our assets and conserving them for future generations at the same time. That's a part of our organizational risk we're focused on. So our staff at Bessie are pretty hardworking. I'm gonna highlight a person who's in the room here in a minute. We review a lot of well plans that involve first-of-its-kind technologies. Okay, I want to give an example of that. Dual gradient drilling. I wasn't here yesterday, but I think that may have been brought up. So this is an example of a technology that one operator has been working on for a while. Our staff have worked pretty hard with the operator to ensure that before it goes out for full field test, that we understand how it works and that it is successful and it meets its own goals, okay? So when this technology was first put to the test that we requested, it wasn't ready yet, okay? It didn't maybe hit its goal straight away, and so we asked them to pull it back, and you know what, they're still working on it. So if there's anybody who thinks that we're not engaging in that sort of frontline technology testing, I'd like to challenge that and invite you to come and have a dialogue about it, because we feel that's very important, that these technologies are not going out into the field before they actually have run through a gamut of testing and peer review. Something else we're focused on in addition to risk is failure, okay? How can new or existing technologies fail prior to their use in a real-world setting? We think about that before we let that permit go out the door. That may not have always been the case, but we're definitely doing it now. We're focused on technology. We have a new tech center that we're opening up in Houston and hiring people for that. We want to build an understanding in advance of a technology's use so that we can identify what can go wrong and what safeguards we can build in to prevent the failures from happening in the first place. Prevention is so important in all aspects of what my organization does. As we consider new deployment of these new technologies, we always ask ourselves, if the technology fails, what would the consequences be? How can we plan for those? And how do you build enough system redundancy so that when it fails in a safe way? You think about failure and you think it can't have a safe way, but that's a part of multiple barriers. It's a part of designing a well in an effective way so that, as we saw with Macondo, it wasn't one thing. It was 6 or 7 or 10 things that failed in a huge cascade of failures, okay? Redundancies actually work if all of those redundancies can fail in a way that is not sort of discordant and additive. So prior to ever issuing a permit to an operator, we start by talking about well design, okay? One of the big things that came out of Macondo that I don't think very many people have heard about, so I'd like to ask if people could nod, who's heard of the well containment screening tool? That's not great. Okay, so you're gonna hear about it really quickly, okay?
It's all the best, you guys. And me, because I sat on the Ocean Energy Safety Advisory.
Well, because we had an advisor who's on that, okay? So this is a joint industry task force that established this new evaluation tool to demonstrate whether or not well design and equipment are adequate for the well containment and whether or not they're suitable for the reservoir conditions that they're trying to drill a well into. This tool is something that was actually very much so born out of Macondo, okay? People know, if they've studied this, I am actually a petroleum geologist by training and trade. And a lot of us looked at that well design and thought, I probably wouldn't have done that. So this tool helps to analyze wells' mechanical and geological integrity to determine whether or not the well is fully mechanical and it's mechanically functional, has good geologic integrity, and it goes through several different things. And then the other extreme is whether or not the well integrity would hold if there was a kick and if it would escape and have a blowout. This tool we've now used for 3 years. Okay, this is I think somewhere where failure has driven some level of innovation. Okay, it's forced us to analyze risk, and our engineers are out there doing this now as a part of all of the Deepwater operations plans and drilling that we approve. So I know I don't want to belabor some of these things. So we've heard a lot of these before. I've changed my notes several times here to be a little adaptive. I'd like to ask the question, wouldn't it be powerful if we could identify and see trends in data as they emerge so that we can work to make sure these don't have near misses that turn into a hit, okay? This is something we also talked about a lot. So this is another area where we're tackling this. So we think that data is critically important, and I appreciate everybody who commented on data and big data. People may not know that the Department of Interior is now on the cloud, okay? We are all migrated to Gmail. Some of us were a little grumpy about that, but it's actually been a pretty good thing. We're nibble in that regard, but one of the places that we at Bessie are really looking at big data is in data collection. I challenge my industry friend here on this panel to go back to Exxon Mobil and ask them to participate in something that will be coming out within the next couple months. We're working with the Bureau of Transportation Statistics to develop a new near-miss reporting system. This will be voluntary, and we hope that people will actually participate. We don't want to do that just here domestically. We want this to be an international database where we can collect data from all around the world, near misses that are happening, so that we can see trends as they emerge. We've seen some trends when we get together with our international colleagues, and we are working to address some of those right now, but it's only because there have been hits, okay? We share our hits, not as much of our near misses, and that's what we're gonna focus on. And so to actually predict trends, you've gotta have that data collection on the front end. We just haven't had that thus far, and we hope that people will participate that going forward. This isn't going to be a gotcha for industry. We're going to aggregate the data through BTS. They're a principal statistical agency. As such, they can protect the proprietary data, and by bidding it in such a way, then it strips off which operator submitted what. So that way, we don't know who it is. We don't care who it is. We just want to see the trends and make sure that we can address safety concerns as they arise. And lastly, on the policy front, we are working on several prominent rules that get at risk reduction. I think everybody knows that we're working on an Arctic rulemaking, and thanks for the comments on that. I can't really talk about where we're at in the process because it's not out for interagency, well, it is an interagency comment period right now, but once it goes out for public comment, I invite every person in this room to go and take a look at that and comment on it. We'd like to engage with the public. We've been trying to do that, and we're going to continue that going forward. We also have the other critical piece of reform that's come out of Macondo that we've been working on for now 4 years, and that's the well control rule. It used to be called the BOP rule. I like to change that as well. It's so much more than blowout preventers, as we saw from Macondo. This proposed regulation will be looking at well control best practices as well. It's a lot more comprehensive than thinking about a piece of critical safety equipment. So our research on oil spill response, I want to highlight somebody in the room here, David Moore. He's done an exceptional job in spearheading all of our oil spill response research efforts. He's been working with the Arctic Council on some things with that regard. This year, we're investing $15 million in our oil spill response research program. OMSET is still conducting a lot of different tests. We had a very successful ice month up there where we did some ice-related spill cleanup activities. So rest assured we are working on that as well. And another thing that came up was a little bit on peer review. That's something that we look to our USGS colleagues and are a little bit envious. Okay, we would love to have that at our bureau, so we're doing that. David Moore has been working with a Sea Grant fellow to get a project in motion, and so look to the future. We plan to have that within the next year. So thank you for your comments on that. Admiral Gautier pointed out that we have many MOUs. I'm not going to talk about those now in the interest of time, but suffice it to say we coordinate a lot, okay? The Bessie and the U.S. Coast Guard coordinate on all levels at all the time. Anytime there's an incident, both of our staffs are out there working on it. We also coordinate on research with the Department of Energy. And if you want to learn about any of that, I invite you to come and check out our website. So I'll get to my second point. So all of those were examples that you should feel good about as a federal taxpayer, I think. I feel pretty good about them. I would like to see more cooperative relationship between the members of our stakeholder community. This is something we need to work on. I was just at a conference, an international conference, where I heard someone get up and say the most disparaging things about government, forgetting that people work at government. Again, people are at the nexus here, all right? We need to build trust in each other. I think there's a lot of distrust that's happened since Macondo, and we're really working on that. And we can do that together, not just government regulators, but with the entire stakeholder community and the public. We can do this by communicating to stakeholders and being transparent. I really love what Marilyn had said. We talked about this earlier, and she had noticed that with Bessie, we had put more and more on our website, and we were showing a lot more transparency. Wasn't always that way. I had a huge distrust of digital media for a long time, but I'm happy to invite each and every one of you to join the conversations that we're publicly having. We're on LinkedIn right now. We have a pretty big following on that. We actually put out substantive information there, so please check it out. Comment on it. We have great listservs where people offer us suggestions all the time. We're on Twitter, and actually Dara is in the back, I think, developing some tweets from this event right now. And we also have some great photos of offshore technologies and people on Flickr. So we're moving the game, and I'm happy to talk anytime about how we're moving in digital media. All in all, we're trying to rebuild public confidence, and that's something that everybody in this room has to do together, okay? People have their confidence and trust with the offshore oil and gas industry was broken, but I think we've gone really far, and there have been a lot of great things that have happened in that time by everybody who sat up here on this panel. We want to make sure that every worker comes home safe every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Dave Westerholm.
Okay.
We've got 30 minutes.
How much time? I actually can scale my time to wrap this up, and I know everyone's getting pretty tired, but there's been a lot of great points, and I think a key thing that Mary said was we've taken a lot of notes. We're not going to be able to cover everything in the discussion at the dais up here, but that means it won't be lost. I'll also going to offer a couple things. Nancy doesn't know about one of them, which is the first one I'm going to mention, and that is we're not the total knowledge of what activities might be undertaken to improve the system. So as you go back and reflect on what's been discussed, if you have, some ideas, if you have things, please email that. Please write, discuss, pick up the phone, call. I know Nancy doesn't mind, and I will be a recipient also if it has anything to do with our organization or you just want me to pass it on. So I'll throw that out to the audience, for task one. But I do want to just highlight a few themes that we heard just very quickly. A lot of this will be repetitive, but for those who heard my discussion earlier about some future scenarios or what we might be having to look at, there's a couple things that we heard that I think we can expect are going to be the same in the next event, whatever that next event is. If we're involved to the extent that we're involved with Exxon or Deepwater or maybe another natural disaster, it is going to be complex. It is going to be a failure of a complex system. It's not going to be one single thing that caused it. It's going to be multiple factors. And it becomes very challenging. We talk about prevention, and I think that's incredibly important. But we've seen even in the best prevention modes that things fail. And so I think we have to keep pushing, we have to keep rethinking, but that will happen, and there will be a failure of some complex system, because they are complex. I think we're going to see that when something happens, there's going to be a reaction to it, whether it's congressional, whether it's from the administration, whether that's from local politics, whether it's from the agency itself. I had the opportunity real briefly after the last conversation to talk to John Rayfield. In one way, we threw a hand grenade over to him and said, okay, you wrote Open 90, but what have you done since? But I think the opposite, he could have thrown it right back and said, hey, it worked. So in many ways, if it hadn't worked, I think by now Congress would have done something incredibly different. But there have been changes. We've talked about them. You know, we just discussed the whole transformation of what MMS was and all the progress that they've made. And I think that that's really reflective of the nimbleness of our government to be able to move forward. So I applaud that. I think we'll be looking at some advances in technology and tools, like Greg pointed out, but I think in many ways we're going to see some of the same techniques that we've seen in the past. I wouldn't be surprised for the next bill to see sorbent booms and regular booms and pads and all the other things, was mechanical skimming equipment. Hopefully we'll have made some improvements, but you know, I think more than one person pointed out there's no silver bullet. Although, Nancy, I got to tell you, I sat down at my table here and it says Bedrock Bioremediation Center, UNH. So between you, I mean, if you can solve the bioremediation problem with bedrock, then oil spill should be no problem. So, so I'll throw that one back to you. But I think the other thing is that we'll talk about some of the things that we really need to work on. And Admiral Allen pointed out big data, some of the other migration to the cloud. We've also taken some steps towards that, certainly with our all of our email. Not all of our systems, but we moved IRMA to the cloud for the very reason that we learned in Deepwater Horizon, that there's a tremendous surge in the capability needed and the readership during times of an event when you don't need the other. The cloud allows that expansion and retraction, so you're not paying for, you know, huge server banks. As far as big data, we're working with the Department of Interior on looking specifically, this was a project we looked at, natural resource damage assessment, and how do you manage, how do you analyze, how do you display, not only for our own purposes, but eventually for the public. And what's the best way to do that? Do we need to work on that more? I think we do. I've heard other efforts, some of which I was unaware of, that we probably need to connect and compare so that we don't duplicate and we leverage the best capabilities out there. We've talked about citizen oversight, and I won't go into that other than to say that is an area I think we all can participate in and work better. We've talked a little bit about citizen science. That's an area I think NOAA has particularly embraced, but we don't know how to tackle the same way that NASA and others have tackled. We talked about the human dimension. That's an area, along with trust, that I think we haven't made the kind of progress we should have made as a country since Exxon to Deepwater. There's still a lot of areas that we do that. Part of it is who owns that problem and how do we get past it, and part of it is just the times we live in with the trust factor. So I throw that out and what we're going to do. I have a whole bunch, well, one last thing. I will talk about the common operating picture, because throughout all of our agencies, we talked about how best we might move forward. And in fact, there's an international, the Open Geospatial Consortium and the oil and gas producers have put out a request worldwide to say what standards should be present so that when we go anywhere in the world, we would be able to use some form that can speak to the other, of integrating into the data. And so I think there is progress that shows that even on a global scale, there's opportunities to work together and do good things, and using that as a example of how we might move forward some of our other initiatives. So I think that's those are some of the highlights of the things that I wanted to say. I have one more task for the audience, and then one more thing to just mention as I close. The task for the audience is, I know myself, I've learned something over these last couple of days. I'm hoping everybody else has. I would encourage, or if I could demand, I would, but I would encourage everyone to hook up with somebody that said something that you weren't aware of, or that you can make a connection with your organization, your agency, your company, your whatever that is, and figure out how best to connect and utilize that as we move forward. A perfect example, as Greg brought up, invite somebody, if you have a drill, if you're organizing a drill, invite somebody else you haven't invited before. Roll in some new initiatives. Find a way to better incorporate academics into that process of the drills and exercise. And I just throw that out as a challenge more to everyone else. We're going to try to do that from this group up here, but if you're counting on us again to get everything done, that's not going to happen. I think we all have to work together. That way, I think the trust will start to build back up. People will get to know our system better, and even though these are rare events over time, we will have built that credibility so that when it does happen, that, maybe we'll be looking at a different reality. But the last thought I wanted to leave you with, and this is really thanks to Maryland, is that I don't want anyone to leave this room without them realizing that without NOAA, you would not have weather. It'd be like living on the moon. So just remember, without NOAA, you would not have any weather. So I thank Maryland for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So at this time, I want to ask if people on the panel have follow-up comments after you've heard each other speak. I noticed that Admiral Allen has been writing things on his folder here. So anyone want to throw out thoughts as a result of what's been said?
Adopt an elected official as well as bringing along someone else to a response exercise. I have said this to fisheries managers over the years because I hear this frustration constantly. And as a former elected official, I understand it from both sides. I hear this frustration that political people don't care. They don't understand. They don't, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, in a lot of cases, they just haven't been sufficiently educated about the problem or the potential solution or the agencies that are stepping up, or in a way, it's really not their fault because they are constantly deluged with all kinds of information. A lot of it actually irrelevant, but it's constantly coming at them. But what they don't often have is someone who is very knowledgeable about science, about regulatory regimes, about risk, about any of the things that we've talked about over these days. Someone just needs to take them to coffee or lunch and just talk about it, not in a threatening way, not in a public hearing, not in a campaign, but just in a relaxed sort of way, and explain why this matters, what's being done, how they can help. I was adopted early in my political career by fisheries scientists that kind of, explained to me how fisheries management worked and the relationship of science to making decisions like, total allowable catch, et cetera. How was I supposed to know that? So adopt an elected official as one of your projects.
Anyone else on the panel want to say anything? Okay. Well, I guess that's the last word there, Dr. Ulmer. I want to thank this panel for sharing their collective wisdom with us, and I'd like to ask you to give another round of applause to them for that.
I don't know, I guess.
And I'm going to have you be exercising that clapping activity quite a bit now. So I'd like to thank all of the presenters. I think we owe them a great debt for the time and energy and effort that they've put into this, and they deserve another round of applause. So. When we started talking about this event some almost 9 months ago, the President's Office, the Office of the Vice Provost of Research, and the Marine School all jumped in to say they would eagerly support it. And I think we owe all of them a huge round of applause for paying for this entire event from soup to nuts so that it could happen here without any government sponsorship or without any industry sponsorship or NGO sponsorship, so that we could have this forum. So I'd like to thank them publicly for doing this and coming up to the plate. I would be remiss not to thank all of those wonderful students whose arms are tired from going like this or rushing people off to lunch and dinner. So I want to thank them. I want to thank Peter and Laura for their diligent typing back there and sending us little messages like you're supposed to have ended 10 minutes ago, that kind of thing. But they've done a great job of doing that translation. And last but not least, and I'll get into a lot of trouble for doing this, I do want to thank Kathy Monsager, who is the unsung heroine of all of these events, because she makes them happen seamlessly, and so a huge thanks to Kathy. And also to the event staff from the university who make chords appear when they need to be, and et cetera. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you, and this is for you, David Moore. You've spent 33.5 hours sitting listening to these discussions. It started at 8 o'clock yesterday morning, and we will end by 5:30, trust me, okay? That's a lot of time. And a lot of you have sat through this hour after hour, and you still seem to be awake and breathing. So that is really amazing. And so a huge hand to yourselves. And last but not least, to the man in the yellow shirt, who I notice has not dressed in business attire today, Mr. David Kennedy. Who really captured this vision that I came up with some 9 months ago about let's move forward, Dave, and he captured it and contacted Jane Lubchenco, who then contacted Admiral Allen and Marcia McNutt, and helped move this ball down the field. So if you liked what happened, we need to thank David. We will go forward. If you know anything about CRRC and CSE, which some of you do, we will go forward. There are people who are not done at 33 and a half hours. They have to go to a working dinner tonight because we will think about how we are going to take action and make some changes happen, some things that have been talked about up here. We will do that. And Dave Westerholm is right. We do want your input. So please keep that input coming. We will generate a report. All the slides from the speakers will be available on our website. We have probably how many hours now, Cindy, of tape? 18 hours of videotape that will be posted in each different section. And we will continue this conversation at Clean Gulf and at the Gomery Conference, which is coming up in February, I believe, and Clean Gulf, which is coming up in December. We will continue this dialogue. And the group that we will convene tonight will come up with action items that we will try and work on, and we will report back to you. So I thank all of you for your diligence. I especially thank, again, the panel here for their comments and thoughts, and all of you. There will be a bus right outside over here if you want to go back to the hotels. And my last thought is to thank the anonymous donor of these flowers that I am wearing. I turned 60 yesterday, and I'm still walking and talking. And here's the good news. I had the most fun of any birthday ever. So that shows I'm a professor. Thank all of you, and safe journey.